A wedding is meant to be a once-in-a-lifetime celebration, a day we imagine for years, where everything from the decorations and attire to the food served on silver trays feels just right. Some people spend months, even years, planning down to the smallest detail, all for that fleeting moment where, for a day, we become royalty in the eyes of our loved ones. But what if that perfect moment turned into something grotesque, something so disturbing that guests left traumatized, vowing never to eat meat again? This is not an urban legend. It happened not in some distant past, but in modern-day Philippines. A story so surreal, so disturbing that it left a whole community in disbelief. This is the case of Benji Ganay. It all started in July 2004, when two men walked into the Nara Town police station. One of them was Juni Buyot, the other an older man from the village. At first, they hesitated. Buyot stood silent, weighing his words carefully. Then, as if steeling himself for something irreversible, he spoke. "We killed a man," he said, "and we made our wedding guests eat him." The officers were stunned. Cannibalism was believed to be a thing of the past, something from a very different time, a different world. But now, here was a man claiming it had happened again, and not in secrecy, but during a public, joyous occasion. Police questioned the two men, trying to piece together what had taken place. They were told the rest of the story lay deep in the forest. Guided by Buyot, officers trekked into the thick brush. At first, they found nothing, but after 2 days of searching, they came upon what remained: burned bones, charred fragments of clothing, clumps of singed hair. Forensic analysis confirmed it. The remains had been burned and dumped. Additional bones, they were told, had been thrown into a nearby creek, left for the rain to wash away. The victim was soon identified as 25-year-old Benji Ganay. But how did it come to this? Who was Benji, and how did he become the center of such a horrifying act? His name was Benji Ganay. There's little known about his life before the headlines. No school records, no clear backstory. Just a name, an age, 25, and a few fragments of family connection. He was the cousin of Eladio Baule, the man who would later be named the main perpetrator. The others involved were also distant relatives. Blood tied them together. But on that day, it meant nothing. The chain of events that led to Benji's death sounded, at first, almost absurd. Too minor, too accidental to end in something so brutal. A single misstep, a moment of clumsiness. That was all it took. The incident happened on what was supposed to be a joyous day for the Baule family, the wedding of Eladio's daughter. It was July 17th, 2004, and the village in Palawan was alive with music, food, and laughter. Like many Filipino traditions, the celebration began before the official ceremony. There was a pre-wedding gathering, a smaller event for close relatives, a time for singing, dancing, and sharing drinks under the warm glow of festivity. Benji had been invited to this gathering, held by the groom's family in a remote part of town. The atmosphere was light. People formed circles, clapped along to the rhythm, held hands, and took turns dancing with the bride and groom. Then, in the middle of the dancing, it happened. Benji tripped. No one saw exactly what caught his foot, maybe a mat, maybe another guest's leg, but he stumbled forward. As he fell, his hand reached out to stop his fall, and in the chaos, it landed on the bride's lower back, or maybe just slightly lower. She yelped, startled, the music stopped, heads turned. Benji was mortified. He stood quickly, bowing repeatedly, apologizing to the bride, to her family, to anyone who would listen. "Sorry," he kept saying, again and again. So it was clear to many that it was an accident. One voice even called out, trying to diffuse the tension, "Let's keep dancing." And the music resumed. The crowd tried to move on. But not everyone did. Among the onlookers stood the bride's father, Eladio. His expression hadn't softened. nor had the gazes of several other men, relatives of the bride, watching Benji now with something darker in their eyes. Their smiles were gone. What remained was quiet and cold, like a decision had already been made. The dance went on, but the mood had shifted. What happened next would not only end a life, it would stain a family celebration forever. Eladio couldn't let it go. To him, an apology wasn't enough, not for the shame he believed had been brought upon his daughter, not for the disruption of what should have been the proudest day of his life. In his eyes, Benji had crossed a line, and now justice, his version of it, had to be served. Fueled by resentment, Eladio gathered 3 of his own kin. His 21-year-old son, Gerald Bellet, his 36-year-old nephew, Sabtuary PK, and another cousin, Junie Buyot, the same man who would eventually confess it all. At first, their plan was to scare Benji, nothing more, just a warning. They forced him into a motorized tricycle and drove out, away from the village and into a secluded area, the kind of place where no one would hear a thing. But once they got there, something shifted. Fear wasn't enough for Eladio. The anger that had been simmering now boiled over. He pulled out the knife he had brought, meant only to intimidate, and without hesitation stabbed Benji, once, twice, again, until the young man collapsed and stopped moving. The others joined in, beating and cutting him as they punished him together. And when Benji no longer showed signs of life, the violence didn't end. They stripped his body, gathered coconut leaves, poured kerosene, but before setting the body alight, Eladio did something that sent a chill through even his co-conspirators. He cut off Benji's tongue and ear and ate them raw, smiling as he chewed. When the body had been reduced to charred remains, they began cutting and dismembering what was left. Some parts were too burned, too disfigured. Those were thrown into a creek deep in the forest, where the rain might wash them away. The rest, they had other plans. As they worked, they noticed Junie Buyot growing pale. Unlike the others, he hadn't fully participated in the attack. He kept his distance. His silence spoke volumes. One of them asked, "What's wrong with you?" Buyot only muttered, "Nothing," avoiding their eyes. But Eladio wasn't convinced. He ordered PK and Gerald to grab him. Then he picked up a piece of the roasted flesh and pressed a knife to Buyot's neck. "Eat this." Buyot resisted, but there were 3 of them and only one of him. He couldn't fight back. They shoved the meat into his mouth and forced him to chew. The taste, smoke, blood, burned skin, he would later say never left him. He swallowed it once and vowed never again. The others laughed, mocked him, called him a coward. But as they laughed, another thought formed, a darker, more disturbing idea. What if they fed the rest of the meat to the guests? They set to work quickly. Eladio assigned tasks. Some would prepare the meat, separating it from the bone and cutting it into chunks. Others would dispose of the unusable parts, dumping them far from the road. The pieces they deemed fit for serving was stuffed into cellophane bags. Hours later, under the cover of celebration and distraction, they returned to the venue. By then, the party had shifted. The dancing was sloppier, the guests drunker. Music blared, people swayed with liquor in their hands, and others sat off to the side, too intoxicated to stand, idly eating whatever was in front of them. In the back kitchen, the men worked fast. They opened their bags, took out the meat, cut it into smaller pieces, mixed it with the prepared dishes, food meant for celebration. The line between livestock and human flesh blurred, and no one noticed. Plates were served, people ate, and Benji Ganai, who had once danced and laughed with these same people, was now being consumed by them. Not a soul knew what they were chewing. Not yet. Eladio walked through the room like nothing had happened. He smiled, nodded, shared drinks and brief conversations with guests, friends, neighbors, extended family. With practiced ease, he handed out the food. His son and nephews did the same, blending in as if the night were still one of celebration. Laughter echoed through the wall, plates clinked, people ate heartily. Some returned for seconds, complimenting the food, their mouths full of what they could never have imagined. To Eladio, it felt like victory. No one suspected a thing, no one asked. The dark secret they carried seemed buried beneath alcohol and music, and the haze of the village wedding night. He believed the crime would vanish with the celebration. But the silence wouldn't last. What Eladio hadn't counted on was the weight of guilt settling into someone much closer than an outsider. Junie Buyot couldn't forget. In the days that followed, he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Benji's face, the fear, the pain, the helplessness. The stench of burnt flesh clung to his memory. And worst of all, the taste, the human meat he was forced to eat, haunted him every time he tried to eat anything else. 8 days passed, and finally, Buyot broke. He confided in a local elder, a respected village leader. He poured out everything: the murder, the fire, the dismemberment, the food. The elder was speechless. He had heard rumors, old stories, folklore, never something like this, and never involving family. The elder didn't hesitate. He urged Buyot to go to the police. Still afraid of what would come, Buyot hesitated, but the guilt was stronger. Together, they walked into the narrow town police station, just two men carrying a truth too horrific to believe. Buyot confessed everything. He explained what had happened on that wedding night in the remote village of Palawan. How Benji had died, how his body was burned, how they disposed of the remains, and where the rest had gone. At first, police weren't sure what to make of it, but Buyot led them into the forest. It took 2 days of careful searching, but eventually they found what remained: blackened bones, scrapes of clothing, and tufts of hair hidden beneath the forest floor. When they asked about the missing body parts, Buyot said it plainly: the guests ate them. It was a line that would send shockwaves across the country. The media caught on quickly. A murder at a wedding was already disturbing enough. But this, cannibalism hidden in plain sight, it sounded like fiction. But it wasn't. People were horrified. How could no one have noticed? How could anyone eat human flesh without realizing it? The truth was likely simple and sad. Most of the guests were too drunk, their senses dulled, their guards down. Food was food. No one suspected the host could ever do such a thing, especially not to one of their own. Senior Superintendent Perla Bakel, the police chief of Nara Town, later told the press he had never encountered anything like it, not in his career, not even in stories. The charred remains found in the forest were later confirmed to belong to 25-year-old Benji Ganai. The identification came through forensic examination and Junie Buyot's detailed confession. Benji wasn't a stranger. He was one of their own, family. When word spread that human bones had been discovered in the forest, another man cracked: Sabtuary Bikay. Overwhelmed with guilt, he turned himself in to the authorities and admitted his role in the killing. With 2 confessions on record, police swiftly moved to arrest Eladio Balde and his son Gerald. But Eladio, even in custody, refused to accept any responsibility. Whenever cameras were near, he would cover his face. He remained silent around reporters, never offering a clear explanation. According to Senior Police Inspector Perla Bakel, the motive behind such extreme violence still remains unclear. But one thing was certain: Eladio was intoxicated on the day of the wedding. Investigators noted that he had already been drinking before Benji's accidental stumble. As details of the case unraveled, the story spread like wildfire, not just in Palawan, not just across the Philippines, but around the world. The picturesque town of Nara, once known for its serene rice paddies, lush mountains, and tranquil beaches, suddenly had a new sinister label. People began calling it the town of cannibals. Online rumors ran rampant, claims that tribal cannibalism had returned, that visitors might be at risk, that no one was truly safe. Tourism plummeted, local businesses suffered, curious visitors stopped coming. The mayor of Nara, Lucena Damala, held a press conference, calling the incident an isolated case. "The people of Nara are kind," she said. "This is not who we are." But the damage was already done. Reynaldo de la Rosa, Nara's tourism officer, criticized the media. He blamed sensationalist headlines for distorting facts, for associating the town's traditions with something monstrous. He argued that careless reporting had shattered Nara's growing reputation as a nature destination, home to hidden waterfalls, mountain trails, and healing hot springs. Some continued to believe the worst. Eventually, Junie Buyot, who came forward and led police to the truth, was ultimately treated as a cooperating witness. His testimony was crucial in uncovering what happened that night. As for Eladio, Gerald, and Piquet, beyond the initial arrest, little is known. There were no televised court hearings, no detailed sentencing reports, just scattered headlines, a few police statements, and then silence. The story faded, but the questions didn't. Legal experts suggested that the sheer brutality and the alleged act of cannibalism could lead to the harshest possible punishment under the law. But without any follow-up from official channels, the public was left in the dark. No closure, no justice, at least not publicly. So, in that silence, speculation took root. Some believed Eladio's rage was the product of alcohol, plain and simple. That he was already deep in his cups before the dancing even began. That his judgment was clouded, and what might have been a tolerable misunderstanding in the light of day became, through the haze of liquor, a personal offense that demanded blood. But others weren't so sure. Could alcohol alone push a man to butcher his own cousin, roast his body, and serve it to guests with a smile? Some locals whispered that drugs might have been involved, that perhaps someone brought more than just booze to the celebration, substances that altered minds and broke moral barriers. There were even darker suggestions, old feuds within the family, years of tension that had simmered beneath the surface. Maybe Benji had unknowingly crossed a line that had nothing to do with the bride. Maybe the accident was just the final push over a cliff long in the making. And what about the laughter? The jokes made as they forced Buyot to eat a piece of Benji's flesh? That wasn't the reaction of someone acting in a drunken blackout. That was cruelty, cold and deliberate. So now we're left asking, was this really a case of sudden drunken violence, or something far more premeditated? What kind of rage or madness does it take to kill someone so personally, so brutally, and then turn the act into a public deception? And what kind of punishment could ever be enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I don't know. Do you think alcohol and heat-of-the-moment anger were enough to explain what happened? Or do you believe there was something deeper at play? Hatred, jealousy, maybe even generational conflict? And if you've heard anything new about where Eladio, Gerald, or Piquet are now, whether they were tried, imprisoned, or simply disappeared, share what you know. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.